history meets the public. And it really falls under this theme of bringing down history and archaeology from the ivory tower. Because, you know, in the past, how the academia really has been accused of being isolated, being very theoretical and abstract and all on its own in the ivory tower. But this has really been an initiative by the Department of History and Archaeology to just democratize history, to allow non-students both in the university and even from outside the university to be able to access these weekly seminars, and which is a great thing for both the speakers, the academics who come to present, the public intellectuals, but also for the public, because it's a way of just really enriching discourse, enriching our general intellectual quotient as a nation. And so we are here, we have an in-person section, and then there's also the online session. And I see comrades that are already online. So welcome to all of you here. And I'll not take much time in just giving that overview, but we'll just get into it. But before we continue, I just want to really give a kudos and salute to Professor Ombongi, who the chairman of the department, who really set this series going on and has been very receptive to some of these ideas. Gwada and I actually approached him, I think it was about a year ago, because Gwada and I know each other from many, many years back, from civil society and other spaces. And behind Professor Mbongi's back, we call him a genius. Like he's very smart, and so he's able to pick when ideas are interesting and there's something to them. So really, just appreciating you for that, for having this session here today. And so we just get right into it. I'll introduce our speaker for the day, and his name is Gwada Ogot, and he describes himself as the foremost knowledge producer. He's been in civil society. He was in the Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy, CCEDU, in Uganda, where he was the head of research. He has also been writing. He's a very prolific writer, and he's published quite a bit. He's also been in politics. I think some might remember him from the previous election with the Roots Party, where he did a lot in terms of strategy. So he's a prolific writer on fairly polemical subjects. His foremost publication is the Universal Theory of Circumcision, a monograph in which he makes an interesting argument that all genital modifications are compelled by imbalances in the supply of fresh water and sunshine. He's also written an encyclopedia on Luo, Great Light of Nations. Presently, he's finalizing a book on the world's first universal dictionary of quantum language. And also just to say that we have a copy of his book, here today. If anybody would like to buy a copy or would like to order, you could do that after, and you could also get it signed after the session. So this is it, Luo, Great Light of Nations, and it's by his pseudonym as a writer, Enoch Ra, for those who know his written work. So we're going to give him an opportunity to come and just make his presentation, and then which will go up to an hour, and then we'll have time for questions and feedback and other engagement. And then at the end of it is when those that would like to get a copy of this book, I believe it's 1,000 shillings. Sorry? 4,000 shillings. I'm so sorry I was bringing it down really. Yeah. So if you'd like to get a copy, whether you can write in the chat if you're online, or from here you can see either myself or Gwada or a colleague Miheso. Yeah, so we'll have that. He'll come and speak, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answer, and then we'll just really be done with the day. So I'm very, very happy and very, very excited to listen to what he has to say to us today. And so kwa hivyo, karibu sana, Gwada. Welcome. Let's give him a hand as he comes to the front.
Thank you very much, Kingwa Kamenchu. Or I use this one. Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Kingwa Kamenchu. Thank you very much for the generous introduction. I I'd also like to give a special thanks to Professor Kenneth Mbongi for this opportunity to be here. About 9-10 months ago, we had a session with Kingwa, discussion session, which he thought had some interesting material. And Kingwa took me by hand and brought me to Professor Kenneth Mbongi's office. And we had a chat. And he told me he had had some interesting things during our discussion, which he wanted me to share with a wider group. And that really is why I'm here today. The topic on which I am going to present is really about the history of language in relation to light. This presentation is primarily about understanding the history of language through light. One of the core issues that presents is that there are two language classifications which have hitherto not been brought out clearly in the academia. As a member of the public, I have been developing this material over a period of time. And like Kingwa has said, I am working currently on a universal dictionary of language, which connects the Luo language, the Luya language, Kiswahili, and English as a composite, as one. While it's still work in process, it's about 1,500 pages to date, but it is work going on. So the key thing about being here is to give a presentation from the context of the public, not from within the academia, how we see things and how we do things. In these two language classifications that I speak about, the first language classification along the Nile is called the Lu language classification, and the second is called the OT language classification. The key components of the Lu language classification are the Luo and Luya languages, while the Ot languages includes Itesot, Pokot, Atwot, and Atwot, and Sabaot. Each of these things that I mentioned are subsequently explained as we go by. Besides sharing a common genealogy, the Lu languages are connected by a unique relation to light and to fresh water, to which they peg all meaning. In addition, this paper asserts that Luo and Luhia are the primary sources from which all universal names agglutinate. This means that only they possess the intrinsic capacity to encode and decode meanings of morphemes upon which all toponyms, anthroponyms, astronyms, hydronyms, oronyms, and ostronyms of the world are constructed. In fact, as the age of luminescence peters away, academia will have to reset its pinnacles from consumption of processed information to production of new knowledge. The dichotomous division of the Holy Bible into two testaments presents a more lucid graphic of this light variance. The Old Testament is a product of the incandescent season, the season of sunrise. Its scholarship, its scholars are unsurpassed. And the time started with James of sagacious men and women, writing of new laws, kingship, prophecy, and inventions. On the contrary, the New Testament represents the season of moonlight. Significantly, this is when turning the other cheek is tacitly prescribed, and also when the crucifixion of Jesus ultimately takes place. Since everything organic is subject to this dichotomy, the swing of light is what most probably explains the disappearance of ancient biblical names such as Sodom, Oboth, Nazareth, and Galilee. When natural light shifts from one horizon to another over the long count of light, new names emerge via this cyclic process. Peak light shifts also explain, in biblical terms, the transformation of Saul to Paul, of Jacob to Israel, and of Jacob to Israel. Summarily, a new illumination or peak shift is thus what reveals the original places of Luo and Luhya in the global order of languages. In this paper, I present Luo as the first language of light, with the sun as its elemental force, and Luhya as the second language of light, with the moon as its astro-spiritual stimulus. As a couple, one is male and the other female, or alternately, one is father and the other mother. As the first language for scientific and liturgical instruction, Luo is the seed and Luhya is the proliferation. In its baptismal role, Luo named every landscape, feature, city, nation, and continent, a fact which suggests that it is the elusive language of light which was spoken globally until the fateful Tower of Babel project. Now, to get to this to that stage, I now wish to maybe give a bit of examples about what I mean. And I probably use localized examples first. If you asked me the meaning of Kariako, as you know it, I will break it down into Kari Okor in Luo, your place was prophesied. If you ask me about Mombasa, I would tell you Ma Ombasa. Ombasa is a seed, a herbal seed. If you ask me about Buruburu, I would say it is dust. Buruburu. If you asked me about Kaloleni, I would explain it as Kal-ole-ni. Pass this orb of light. All the meanings are centered on one factor, light. If you get to give a more international perspective, if you ask me about, scientifically, China is known as Sino-China. And China is an agglutination of the Luo phrase, chi na, guide for me this weak light. Sino is a Luo phrase that means a small uncultivated area within a wider cultivated area. And the context is further qualified by the capital city, which is Beijing, which is also an agglutination from the Luo phrase, Beijing. Are you strong enough? Now, all these things contextualize through one language, and that applies to the whole world. In that regard, after those examples, I will now move to defining the scope of the Lu languages, and I will present to you now what is called the Lu language family. The sun, as the singular source of universal light and heat, is native to Africa. When I say this, I mean that Africa is the point of sunrise, and that we in Kenya live in the east from where the sun rises. As the citadel of global knowledge and spiritualism, Africa is also the home to the greatest number of languages, many of them located within Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan, within this region where we live and where around these water bodies in the region. Several of these language families, including the Lu and Ot, are domiciled in the Upper Nile Valley, the site of the world's baptismal civilizations. Of specific interest in this particular presentation are Luo and Luhya. Lu languages share a common ancestry of tropical light and heat, as well as a heritage that roots from Luo language as the core. Moreover, and as a distinguishing quality of this royalty, Luo speakers are exclusively settled around most of the freshwater basins within the Upper Nile Valley. Natural freshwater symbolizes premier quality settlement. Luo and Luhya are distinct as the Lu languages which wrote the original texts of the Holy Bible, and I wish to explain. My explanation is based on the abilities of these languages to translate all the meanings of all the anthroponyms and toponyms and even the names of God within the Holy Bible. For example, we all know the Yahweh to be a name of God. Yahweh, in this context, derives from the Luo phrase Yahweh, which means unveil the light. Then we also know of the phrase Elohim. Elohim is an agglutination of the Luo phrase Elo Giimo, which means sunrise and sunset. Another more distinct and defining example is the name Solomon. Solomon had about 800 wives. But if you translate his name from a Luo trajectory, it agglutinates from the phrase Solomon, the one who mobilized numerous women. So when I say that they wrote the Holy Bible, I put it into context because of its ability to explain most of these names. Typical of specialized languages such as these, they differ from others in terms of capacities to collate and convey technical information. For example, amongst the Luhya, when the Luhya talk of, when you read about Queen Sheba, it might read completely alien, but when you translate it in Luhya, it derives from the phrase Ohushevwa, which means the initiated one. She was an initiated queen, and you contextualize it by her purpose to visit Solomon, who was actually an intellectual, and to spend time with him. These languages, the Lu language family, is mainly domiciled east as the point of arising, as they are the two main rails along which universal language and knowledge commence and proliferate. Luo as seed is specifically concentrated along the northern axis of the Nile towards Egypt. While Luhya as the flowering expectedly proliferates through much of the south and the western parts of the world and Africa. In Kenya, speakers of the Lu language family are specifically settled around the water-rich west, where nearly 7% of the nation's 11% total surface freshwater quota is found. And because of this reason, you find that there is very little circumcision around freshwater bodies, in fact, hardly. The Turkana who live by Lake Turkana do not engage in any form of genital modifications. The defining factor is water. The Itesot and the Luo from the west do not engage in any genital modifications. The key factor is water. In other words, of Kenya's 63 communities, or nearly 70 communities, the 3 that live or that are located within freshwater bodies do not engage in any genital modifications. But all those that reside or that are domiciled outside freshwater basins, they all engage in genital modifications. That is where one of the major factors of freshwater. Secondly, these regions experience searing tropical heat all year round. The region has a galaxy of Lu languages which proliferate from Luhya. These include Lunyore, Lusamia, Lumarama, Ruchisa, Rumasaba, Ruisuha, Rurokori, Lunyala, Rusamia, and Ruidaho, amongst others. The key word here is Lu, which means it's a detonation of light. In neighboring Uganda, where the surface freshwater proportion stands at 33%, courtesy of the Blue and White Nile, as well as the Kagera, the Lu language family includes Luo, Lugbara, Luganda, Runyankore, Rusoga, Ruchiga, Lugwere, and Runyankore, amongst others. A mapping by cognates also reveals that the scope of Luhya influence well extends beyond the western frontiers of the Sango Basin through to the Congo and also southwards towards Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, and South Africa. To illustrate this spread and contours, I have randomly picked on a word called ogonglo, a Luo word for centipede, and tracked its meaning through various languages and nations within the region. In this next chapter, or this next phase, I am going to give certain examples to illustrate my point further. But first, I will start with two. When I first met Professor, I asked him who the name of the matriarch of the Kisi, and he told me she was called Nyako Mogendi. Then I told him Nyako Mogendi in Luo it agglutinates from the Luo phrase Nyako Mogende, a completely trustworthy or a woman in which we had a lot of faith, Nyako Mogendi. Then the next one was Mumbi for the Kikuyu, the matriarch of the Kikuyu. Mumbi derives from the phrase Muma, which means oath, a word shared in meaning in both Kikuyu and Luo. Mumbi, the Holy Bible is also known as Muma. Mumbi therefore denotes your personal oath. In this story, or in this categorization, we are able to explain beyond, in another book, one of my books that I have covered, the origin of Mumbi from the first family that came in through the west and settled at Ng'ia in Alego in Siaya County, and the circumstances under which Mumbi left to go and establish her home in Muranga, in a place called Ndakaini. Muranga agglutinates from the phrase Muranga. I come from the Mur clan of Alego. And Mumbi settled her home in a place called Muranga, my pure source of light. Those are just explanations that give further and broader illustration of what I'm saying. To illustrate this point further, I specifically chose, sorry, I went a step ahead. To fortify this point, I have below listed examples that showcase the connections between Luo and Luhya to Kiswahili and English and beyond. Light and heat characterize the range within which the Luo languages are spoken. These linkages supersede the common padlocking of language into Nilotic or Bantu. For instance, the Mexican term ganja is actually an anagram of the Luo word njaga. It leaves the west as njaga, but when it gets to it leaves the east as njaga, but goes through an elliptical motion, but when it gets to the west, it is now ganja. It is turned around. This sequence illustrates the movement of language from light, east to west, and the changes it undergoes. To illustrate this point further, I specifically chose to track the spread of language westward and southwards using ogonglo, the Luo word for centipedes. Ogonglo are a diverse and universal term of arthropods belonging to the Chilopoda scientific class, which exists almost everywhere. From Luo westwards, the creature is known as Rikongoro amongst the Luhya speakers. The first neighbors of the Luo westwards are the Luhya. They call it Rikongoro. In neighboring Uganda, in both Luganda and Lusoga languages respectively, they are known as Gongoro and Eigongoro. In the Kikuyu language, centipedes are called Munyongoro or Munyongoro. I may not pronounce it well. A term which in addition relates to the Luo original. In South Africa, amongst the Zulu, it is known as Shongololo. And in Songa language, which cognates substantively with Luhya languages, it is known as Horongoti. So you can find a commonality within all these meanings around the same thing. The next example I use is the phrase nam, the generic Luo term for large fresh water bodies, which means either denotes vastness or expansive waters. Nam is the host morpheme of the word name, which is a vast thing, a tag full of meaning, and also the host morpheme of the word tsunami, a big water wave. Nam is also the host morpheme for toponyms such as Panama, Namibia, Namanga, and Nambare, amongst others. The common factor being that all these toponyms describe locations that are based either within a freshwater basin or a freshwater or a water shore. Next, I use the Luo term reso, which means to save. In Luya, reso is expressed as ohuresa, you have saved me. And in English, it is rescue. The meanings are the same across the board. Another example is the Luo phrase musi. Musi is the Luo word for dictionary or foundation, and is similarly the host morpheme of the Kiswahili kamusi, which means a dictionary. And in English, it is muses, which are intellectual inspirations or scholarly spars. Musi is also the root origin of muse or muse, a Kiswahili term which defines a sagacious elder, a man of wisdom. Another example is the word mano in Luo. Mano means to gift. In Luya is ohumanura, to gift. And in English, it is manna from heaven, another gift from the heavens. Another example is match, which in Luo means fire or combustion. It is the basis or the host morpheme of the English term machine, which is also predicated on combustion. A final example in this particular case is the word middle, which is synonymous with center and derives from the Luo phrase amidi-midi, which defines a live center as opposed to a dead center. The last part of this presentation is now to qualify with specific reason or with a summary of reasons why these languages therefore fit the context of languages of light. Since each language, as I have said before, is defined by its natural domain, pinpointing Luo and Luya as the world's first and second languages of light must be backed by some tangible evidence of unique characteristics that distinguish their natural habitat from that of others. Indeed, these languages nucleate in regions which enjoy year-round tropical sunshine and therefore abundant natural heat, bountiful supplies of fresh water, as well as gentle landscape or terrain, because culture too is a practical product of these realities of nature. That's why I'd mentioned that communities that practice circumcision specifically live outside freshwater basins. And those that do not practice ritual circumcision live within water basins. So it defines a sanitation-based approach or a sanitation-based objective. These all define these characters or these characteristics that we employ as culture. The light is the core ingredient in the mold of language because natural sound primarily originates from the sun, which functions like a power dynamo. The sun is not stagnant. Since it is the source of light, it is also the source of sound. Together with the nature of landscape and the levels of natural water supplies, these factors customize the unique accents of every region, including the rhythm, rhyme, and speed of expression. Indeed, these three factors contextualize the theographic, ideographic, phonographic, and iconographic content and orientation of languages. Now I will go to the reasons one by one. First, the first distinction for the Luo language is within the languages themselves, because there are several dialects spoken. There are several dialects spoken along the Nile Valley, the Upper Nile Valley. Though they cognate and appear as a single unit, they distinguish into two classifications. One group called Tho Luo and another one called Lep Luo. The varieties spoken in Kenya, Tanzania, and Sudan are mainly defined by Tho Luo, which in translation means the language for following the light. In Sudan, the Atwot, who also fall within the classification of the Ot languages, define their language, they have two languages which they define by the primary phrase Dok Chieng. And again, the names of the languages are related to light and to a specific object of light called the sun. As a host morpheme, Dok, Tho means Dok or Tho means the mouth, and hence the mouthpiece, which again gives context to what we are doing. It's not just sight, it is speech. Lep Luo, however, classifies dialects spoken mainly in Uganda and Congo. Lep means the tongue, which is an integral part of the mouth and of speech. But Lep also signifies lighter influence and swiftness or speed based on the Luo phrase Lep Lep, something that is light. Next is the origin of the term God, that is be. As we all know, landscape plays a critical role in how humans define spirituality. In the Holy Bible, for instance, the Spirit of God is said to reside in the mountains. The special relation between light and the mountain is consistently extolled in the holy books, whether it's in the Quran, which I present as defining from the Luo phrase Quran, my prophecy, or whether it's the universal identity of all people in the world. When you call yourself a Ugandan, a Kenyan, it derives from the Luo phrase An, which is the self. So my identity is based on Kenyan, American, and the basis or the morpheme of that, the host morpheme of that is An. In this same way, in the Bible, we are told that the Spirit of God resides in the mountain. Mountains are known as, in plural, as Gode in Luo. As such, whenever people retreated into the mountains or into the Gode to pray, they were known to go to relate with God in his place of residence, and hence the name God, or the English word God, as a symbol of spirituality. In part C, I will go to the names of God, which I've already touched on. The logic is that the language in which all names of God and of prophets and of places translate, and which singularly and exclusively contextualize them around light, is probably or most likely the one in which they were coined in the first place. And like we had agreed earlier, nothing is coincidental. Names of God such as Yahweh, which means Yahweh, or Elohim, which means sunset, or agglutinates from the Luo phrase sunset and sunrise, or El, which also means unveil, are all agglutinations from Luo words whose meanings are centered on unveiling light or illumination. Indeed, so far, no other language has been known to possess the capacity to logically explain meanings behind all these names, and no language has also shown the capacity to translate all names of peoples, groups, places, and landscape universally. I will give another example in this case of the word Busia or Siaya. The co-morpheme is Sia. When you say Busia, you're talking of two factors of equal measure that are together but different. It derives from the Luo word Sianda, which relates to buttocks, two of a kind, together but different. It is also the host morpheme of the word Siamese, two that are joined together, different but one. So when I say Bu Sia, I am talking of the horn of the neighbors. When I talk about Siaya, I am talking of those who relate with the Almighty. So anytime you get the word Sia, you know it relates to two of a kind. It can be applied across all languages. Next, I will go to certain specific symbolisms. One, the signature of the Luo people everywhere is O, hence Otieno, Omondi, Okelo. The O is not an acoustic convenience. O denotes a perfect circle or cycle of light or life. The philosophical symbol of O is the sun, which is viewed as a perfect circle. O is also a symbol of life because it is the sign of the water well. The water well is perpetually round in every home, while the grave and the toilet are of specific design, square or rectangular, which denotes an end. That is why when you play football, when the ball hits the net, which is the rectangle, it is the end, you start afresh. When you play hockey, the end is the net, the square. But O specifically is a symbol of life, hence the water well. Hence our plates, our cutlery, our pots, everything is O to denote a perfect symbol of light. O is also the sign of light bulbs, lenses, utilities such as plates, cups, and pots. It is also the symbol of skill, which means a complete person, a person with perfect balance. And that is why all sports use a circular object or score through the pursuit of a round object. That is O for the Luo. For the Luhya, their universal symbol is A. Hence you get Andambi, Amaremba, Akelo, Awinja. O is the beginning of the count, and A is the first or the numerical value or has the numerical value 1. Notably, the numerical value of A is 1. A thus represents the beginning of the proliferation. And that's why I'd say that Luo is the seed that is restricted, but A and Luhya is the proliferation that spreads from east to the west. Being the first offspring of light, identities of Luhya speakers are hosted on the morpheme Ava, Ava Luhya, Ava Marama, Ava Bukusu, Ava Chisa, Ava. The only other group that enjoys that distinction of Ava in that region is Abagusi. And I will explain why it is different as we move by in the next chapter. This light context, or amongst the Luhya with the symbol A, also explains the logical context behind the song Mwana Mberi, which means the firstborn child, and which has become, or which glorifies the firstborn child, and which has become popularly known as the Luhya anthem. A, the first child, A, the beginning, the first after the basis of the count, O, then we move to A. In the next phrase, I qualify both A and O. The first letter of every name has a distinct value and meaning, as I had said. It is therefore not a convenience. Importantly, it illustrates the numerical order of human settlement. Human settlement, according to my presentation, is not random, but follows an order that starts from the waters moving forward. Mythology in every community will tell you, oh, we came from the water. We came from the water because the water is the beginning of the count. And our settlement here is also not based on some random thing. It is based on an order of the count. O, as the signature symbol of Luo, represents the beginning of the count, the numerical value of O being 0, the core. Subsequently comes numeral 1 after O. The alphabetic counterpart of 1 is A, which belongs to the Lu here. When you move to Uganda, there is a distinction. After you have crossed from the Avaluia, Avamarama, Avakisa, once you get to the border, there is no more distinction as Ava. The distinction now becomes Ba. Then you get Wagwere, Wasoga, Baganda, Bairu, Banyankore. Though Ba is also a symbol of royal descent, of light, it is a specific reference to princes and princesses rather than to kings and queens. After Uganda, so we have already gotten O, we have gone to A, we have gone to B, which is 2, then we go to C, which is Congo. The alphabetic motif is C, and the numerical value of C is 3. I use these examples to explain the order of settlement starting from the light westwards. The next point, I have about 10 minutes. The next point is settlement along the tropics. These languages, the Lu languages, their settlements are all unique because they all settle within the tropics. These are regions of the earth that lie roughly in the middle of the globe and which surround the equator. The tropics are the central axis of the sun's light around the sun. So those contextualize language. Then the next factor, which I have touched on variously, is settlements along freshwater bodies. Luo is specifically spoken along the Nile Valley, the Luan Lu here. In fact, in many times, we have had discussions with people that the Lu here may actually be a Nilotic group that speak a Bantu language, rather than, because they all live within the Nilotic basin. So that's another point for discussion another day. When I say freshwater body, that their settlement around freshwater bodies is important, is because water has qualities. There is fresh water and there is salty water. Salty water is not the best quality water. In terms of energy, water is negative and light is positive. Besides depicting a source or a birthplace, as I have indicated, water is important as the primary ingredient for ablution. And that's why I said amongst these communities, genital modifications are rare because they have access to abundant and fresh natural water. The final example, or as I move towards the end, there is the symbolism of the color black. Black, as I present here, is the color of light. Black is the color of the east and the point of sunrise. Black is also the color of knowledge and the color of power. Light and black are two sides of the same coin. Illustratively, to put this point across, the sun is the blackest object in the universe, but produces the brightest light ever. Charcoal is similarly pitch black, but produces brilliant flame in every home. As the source of all color, black represents, black is a representation of an enlightenment. That is why the formal color of writing is black ink. That is why judges, prophets, graduates adorn black gowns or capes. This is also why black is the universal color of school shoes. This is why the Bible is colored black. Maybe that is why Kingwa is also dressed in black today, because she was coming to a home of knowledge. This color symbolism is not accidental. Even on our national flag, according to this presentation, the black on the national flag represents light, the place from where light arises. And that is why the hair on our heads is typically black, because black is the color of light. As you move from this O, the immediate people who are settled around the Lake Basin are very black, like my people, the Luo. But you find that as you move towards the west, people get lighter. When you get to the Luhya, they are lighter. You get to Uganda, what we call the Bantu groups, lighter. As you go on and on, you get to as you go towards the west, it becomes lighter until you get to the Mzungu. But the core issue is it starts from black. In short, the intensity of light decreases as you move from the east towards the west. And that is what colors our speech, our look, our color pigmentations, amongst others. Last but not least is a very contemporary validation of this language using some things we experience every day. When you watch television, most of our adverts on national television are either in English or Kiswahili. But one language is primarily always used, most of the time quite derogatorily, to express adverts. I think there's one of a company that talks about, how about my residential house? I'm sure you've all heard it. The accent is Luo. So several of these you'll find they're not used in very good context, but the key and underlying message is that you are using a language or an accent that represents effective communication. Thirdly, in terms of these water bodies that we were speaking about, when, for example, I read the word Nile, to me, it derives from the Luo phrase Nil, and hence the Kiswahili Manila, that which is long and winding. Nil is a Luo phrase for something that is long and winding. The Kiswahili call it Manila, and down in the English context, it is called the Nile, something long and winding. When you get, for example, the hydronym Mediterranean, when you read it in English, it is condensed as Mediterranean. But when I read it in Luo, it presents as Med-iter-nean. Keep transmitting my peoples. All of these toponyms or hydronyms or anthroponyms can actually be unlocked using mainly two languages, Luo and Luhya. And I think with that short presentation, I could also go and then give you, I spoke about the OT language classification, which I would also like to give a background on, a slight one as I close. OT is a category of diverse languages that were used to provide specialized services in the palace or the government in ancient times. As an institution of life and light, OT represents the all-powerful house of light, an institution of ultimate power and authority. Mainly domiciled along the Upper Nile Valley, the OT language classification has four main components: Pokot, Itesot, Sabaot, and Atwot. This follows the Old Testament practice in which families were responsible for providing specialized services to the state or temple. Use of language to distinguish social or professional identity and status is an age-long practice that continues to present day. An example is the Bunyoro Kingdom, where the royal family speaks Luo in the palace, but they communicate with the governed through Lunyoro. If you go to the Baganda also, the language spoken in the palace is Luo. The instruments of kingship and everything are kept within that context. But when they go outside, they speak a language called Luganda to the public. The plural of Ot is Udi. Ot is a Luo term which in direct translation means a house. As an institutional emblem, Ot is the house of light, a representation of a specialization or status or enlightenment. Ot as a family institution bears dynastic connotations. Ot is an institutionalized family identity, which is the basis of people like the House of Saud, the House of Windsor, the House of Dlamini, the Imperial House of Japan. The core context is Ot, the house as a center. Ot also characterize certain identities. The Atwot, as I had said earlier, use Dok, which means mouth, and that detonates language also as a core. So away from the Sudan, the only language that identifies via this Dok is therefore the Luo spoken in Kenya, which is Dok. Itesot is, however, hosted on Tesre, Tesa, Kutesa, people who work, Mateso, which means suffering or sufferings respectively. Tesre is undue pressure on a person to do something. If I put you under Tesre, I can put you under Tesre to pay my debt or to do some work for me. That is the basis of Itesot. The English, sorry, I just slipped, which is typical again of the people who couldn't say, remember the people in the Bible who were told, can you say Shilobeth? And some said Silobeth, and they were slaughtered. English reflects from in the English reflection, it is testament or test, mateso, terms synonymous with witnessing, trials, and tribulation. The alternative title of the Watende, as I close, of the Teso Itesot is Watende, which confirms them as people of service or people who took tenders. The social configuration of Teso clans offers further insights. In contrast to the Upper Nilotic conventions and most African conventions, Itesot clans are not defined by bloodlines, but along trade lines. These were metal workers, these were woodworkers. Everybody was defined, their clan structure is based on trades rather than blood structures. The same word Udi or houses is also the basis of the toponym Saudi, which is a time of the houses. And Saudi are a group of families who have come together and control the land in which they live. And then the last is Pokot. Pokot means a hair or a branch of the house. Because of time constraints, I had a small summary here of a long list of Swahili words which derive from the Luo, like sanya, which means to collect, derives from the Luo word sanyo. Pima, to measure, is based on the Luo word pimo. Kamusi, I have mentioned. Mwamba, which means a rock. Mwamba in Luo is equal strength. Dawa means medicine. Dawa means security. Scarcity, sorry. Ringa. So many of them derive. You can connect that these languages are actually one, but the original source or the original two rails along which they run are Luo and Luhia, which define by the Lu morpheme. I thank you very much for patiently listening to me. And I wish to hand over to Kingwa to move us into the next stage. And if there are any questions or clarities, I could make them. Thank you very much for listening, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Gwada. Let's give him another hand. You know, the word professor is about professing. So it takes a lot of audacity to be able to just come up with something new and novel to say. And so this perspective, this idea of light as the departure point to understand the world is very intriguing. And thank you for this. And just as you were talking, I was thinking about I was like seeing how the framing of this linguistic history, historical linguistics, and I was now even seeing the historical aspect of things coming out in things like the use of language in traditional royal houses. So there's so much in terms of the direction that this could go to. So thank you so much for that. And I'm sure everyone who's been listening, you've been noticing that there's a lot of esoteric elements. There's the mystical elements, esoteric science, energy science, and which I really, really appreciated. So now we're going to have an opportunity for people to just give their feedback. Anyone with questions, and maybe as people, and so if you have something to say, or if you have a question to ask, you could just you can indicate by putting your hand up. And for our colleagues on Zoom, you could just type the question into the chat box and we'll be able to read it. So maybe I can just begin by preempting just this place. And so some of these are questions, just feedback, thoughts. So it would be interesting to hear, like, if you've come across others with similar thinking, whether it's scholars or people in the kind of like the esoteric sciences, the concept of light as a departure point to understand the world. And then you talked about the idea of the seasons of knowledge, that there's a time in which almost like when after a period of almost desolation, and then there's a big point of rejuvenation and regeneration. So does this apply to all academia, like, and the concepts here, do they apply just to Kenya, or are they a global thing? There's a guy called Neil Howe. He's written a book called Generations. He's a demographer and a historian and economist, and they chronicled seasons of history. And I guess as historians here, we may know a lot about the seasons of history. And so when you were saying that, it reminded me of that, because he says that right now we are in the end of a particular season, we're in a winter season, and so, which is why we can understand a lot of the drama that's happening in the world. Things like people like Donald Trump would never have been elected, would never have been in would never have seen such situations, a time when there's so much conflict all over the world. So it would be interesting to hear just about that, if you could say some more about that. And then you talked about Luo and Luya as languages of light, and it made me wonder, which are the languages of darkness? And it may not be that, it may not be that there's a moral judgment that as languages of light, they're the holy, and these other ones are demonic, but I'd be interested to hear that. And then also, like, even as you go forward with the research, the questions of dates would be interesting to even engage with some more. Like when you talked about the Mexican word for weed, ganja, coming from the Luo, so it's interesting to see how the dates correlate. And I think that's just it from me. And anybody that has a question or that would like to give feedback? Yes, we see one person there. Maybe we'll take two people, and then also Professor. So we'll take three. So I had some questions, one or two there, and then we'll have Professor Gashihi, and then also Professor Umbongi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Can I go on?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I would like to say thank you very much to our esteemed speaker this afternoon. I must say that presentation was quite complex. Well, to me it was. Actually a bit mind-boggling, if I may admit, but nevertheless, very fascinating, no question about that. But in a very simple sense, we all know that language or linguistics is a scientific study. And therefore, my small question would stem from the methodology, perhaps, that our speaker has used as he delves into the history of language in relation to light. How do we distinguish myth from reality, for example? The second one, the second question is a small one again. Does language reflect or construct reality? Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of good food for thought on that. It's Professor Mbongi.
Well, thank you very much, Gwada. You know, you come along with a lot of ironies. When I listened to you first, even today, the same thing. You know, you have explained everything, but you didn't explain your striking resemblance with Franco, the Congolese music maestro, you know, the legendary Franco who dominated the African music scene for a while until he passed away, I think, sometime in the 80s, if I'm not wrong. You have such a striking resemblance, which probably you need to explain, but that's not a serious one. The other one, probably unknown to many, with all these very complex and sophisticated explanations, whether it's coming from a totally different, non-conventional situation. No degree in linguistics, no degree in history. That is something quite interesting and very ironic of him. When you listen to him, if he didn't tell you, he passes for some very serious historian. So probably he will tell us where he gets that energy, knowledge, and skill. But you see, as Dr. Gache said, very complex. At some point, I didn't know whether we are dealing with social history, social linguistics. So I was all over, and sometimes very striking things I'm hearing today. That Luyas, Herbert, you're a Nilot, but you speak a Bantu language. You'll have to tell me how that happens. A few questions. One, your work is, or it sounds to me to be overly Luo-centric, Luo-centric, because of this very interesting focus on Luos and Luyas. I was just wondering, does this represent some kind of, you know, resurgence of Luo and Luya nationalism? You know, maybe you might share with us this. If not, then what justifies such focus on two communities? Of course, there is a dimension in which what you are saying is overly Afrocentric again. The argument that Africa is a center of all languages. You know, and also the idea the centrality of blackness. I'm hearing for the first time today that black is a color of light. It makes me feel a little bit elevated as a black man. Is it part of what many people are calling Africa is rising? So we're rising in these aspects. So make a comment on that.
Then there was another question, I think, that you raised about methodology, yes? Because from a numeric perspective, the count must begin from 0. So you must identify that point. Once you've identified that point and you're able to explain a count, I've just explained that from Luo is 0. From Luya is 1. When you get to Uganda or the Baganda, B is 2. When you get to the Congo, it is C. So that sequence I can develop for most of the world to show how that sequence moves, so that there's a numeric value to every place that you can identify. If you tell me you come from Dahomey, I could probably place you. If you tell me you come from this place, America, I could also place you because of this sequence that you can follow. And these sequences are based on the first symbol of the first and the last symbols of each and every toponym or whatever you will use. You can, there's a sequence to life, to settlement, which I have brought out partly to sample this. So it follows an order that starts from this one is number 1, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. Then Kingwa raised, as I close, a very important issue on time and language. There are 2 contexts of perception, which I said one is incandescent light, and the other one is luminescent. And I gave an example of the Holy Bible, which is divided into 2. One is bright light and one is moonlight. During the season of moonlight, during the season of sunlight, because the world has 2 counts, the daily count and the long count that goes on 7, 7, 49, 490, and it goes by, you can calculate it. During one season of sunlight, you see clearly, and there is mass production of knowledge. We are still reading what Solomon wrote how many years ago? Because there is no comparison in terms of the pyramids. Nobody has come up with anything as spectacular as that, because those were produced during the season of sunlight. During the season of moonlight, you do not see clearly. You need assistance from either a torch or some form of glow that you may use light to, you may need extra light to find your way. So production is less, and you rely on what was produced in the earlier season. That is where we are. So right now, I would say that we are at the close of the luminescent season, and we are at a point of a new arising of languages, of identities, of self-explanation and everything, because we are now able to do what? To see clearly. I don't know if I answer your questions, but I will take another set if there is.
Thank you so much. You know, as I'm sitting there, I'm actually, I was realizing that what your power really is that you have it's like there's a prophetic aspect to you. And Professor Mbongi was very right when he said that he was feeling very inspired. And I was, when you were presenting earlier, I was thinking that if I was a Luo politician, like I would make sure that you're somewhere around me because there's something that you're doing. You're dignifying the people, you're giving a sense of pride, and not just for Luo people, but what Professor Mbongi asked about a resurgence of nationalism, but also for the Black people. And I'd actually written about that you are great in terms of for somebody with imperial dreams. You know how the British imperialism with those the whole white man's burden. So there's a power to that you're proclaiming something, and so for you your power might not be in the footnotes and who you're quoting. Yeah, so in that sense, there's a way in which you might not have answered what Professor Gashi had asked about when it talks about methodology and sources. But I don't want to kind of box you into that. For anybody who's interested in similar kinds of thinking, there's a lady called Swiri Nyarkano on Instagram. I don't know how many have heard of Swiri Nyarkano, by a show of hands. Yes, like she speaks and you're like, it's like you're in church, and it's very Pan-African. There's a lot of esotericism. There's a lot of symbolism. And so I think a big power of today's session is that there's an attempt to kind of try to bring in knowledge and people that are producing knowledge, but might be outside structures, to be able for the academy to benefit, and also for yourselves maybe to benefit. There was a question that I saw on the chat. And so the question is from James Opiko. He says, I'm watching the presentation from Indianapolis we don't know if that's Indiana. Gwada's originality and depth of abstraction is awesome, absolutely. It's the essence of higher learning. Please use all resources available to help him publish his books. Gwada's website, www.cannabiskenya.com. Yes, thank you for that, James. Actually, Gwada has published 3 books, one on cannabis, on circumcision, and this one that we have today, Luo, Great Light of Nations. And I know that because he doesn't have the academic structures that we might be figuring out, trying to understand, okay, how do we understand him? But which is why we laid out the foundation that there's something, even if he's not using the traditional methods of academia, but there's still something to get there. And for me, you're very inspiring, because look at this book. This book is 909 pages. The audacity, you've not quoted anyone. And this book, if you went to the Luo Festival, this book would sell out. So I really admire this, because this is the utility. This is a utility of knowledge. And I think there's a lot to learn from. And I think I'd also even recommend that you kind of even speak to even like some of the academic linguists. Feedback. And again, we had said that we have copies of this particular book, Luo, Great Light of Nations. It's at 4,000 shillings. And you can get a copy if you'd like. You could write to us if you're online. You could write to us to find out how to get it. Or if you're here today, you can just come to the front and you'll be able to get your copy and get your book signed. And so we have Dr. Steve Ouma. Karibu sana. You can actually do it from there.
Thank you. I have a number of observations, Gwada. But first and foremost, I want to really thank you. That has been fertile. And there's so much to learn, and so much that challenges the mind. Now, a number of observations, probably not questions really. If you feel like later on you may clarify, but observations pertinent to what you've presented on. Number one, coming as I do from a law background, where is the place of God as law in all this? What I mean is this. In legal philosophy, law is God, because if you ask who has seen God, nobody has. But it's possible to feel close to or far away from God. Manifestations of God are about rules, commandments. If you obey, you are near. If you disobey, you are distant. And so I was just thinking, where is the place of God, and by extension, law, in all this, so that when you talk, for instance, of the sun, somebody who is not familiar with you will immediately think of the laws of physics. That we have the sun, it emits light, light travels, it lands here. How does that kind of knowledge sit with your assertion that light is something other than just some law of physics? Two, I am curious, when you talk of Luo, I want to ask the question, which Luo? Because Luo could mean many things to many people. I know you and me are Southern Luo extraction, essentially Kenyan and a little bit of Tanzanian. But there is Luo in Bahr el Ghazal. There is Luo in West Nile. There is Luo in northern Uganda, and there is Luo in eastern DRC. And there is Luo in Gambela. Do these people have uniform characteristics? When you talk about Luo, which Luo are you talking about? This question is coming from somewhere. And where is this? You and me, from where I stand, are not authentic Luo. Because we have so much Bantu in us. You look at the physiology, you look at the language, go to southern. I think that I was taught by good teachers is Bantu. They are cousins to Kikuyu, Zembus, and so on, and probably closer. So which Luo? Number three, and this could relate to number two, looking at the anthropological landscape within which the Luos and Luyas live. When you talk of Luos, when you talk of Luyas, there are some who would argue that Luya is not a community. It's a construct which is barely 60, 70 years old. And that Luya is a creation of actually colonialists. So that among Luyas, you'll find Kalenjins. Among Luyas, you'll find Luos. Among Luyas, you'll find Kisses and Tesos. So which Luya? Because as you are aware, there are Luo clans and Luya clans that transcend that Luo divide. You are aware of them. So which Luo, which Luya? You know Jokasagam, Abasakami. Yes? You know Jokageri, Abageri, and many others. Light, go to Gwada, my brother. When you talk of light coming out of the east and setting down in the west, is it east to west? I have a question, maybe not a question, those would be too many. But from where you and me sit, from a Luo standpoint, isn't light an illusion? Are we able to mentally grasp what is this light? Isn't it an illusion? Somebody would say, okay, it is light, it is day, it is dark, it is night. But from the laws of physics, which I think are universal, one would be able to say, now the sun is shining. The sun is several million kilometers away, okay? And it has taken time, so many hours, it has taken light, so many hours to get here. Are we therefore able to appropriate light as people and say, this is here and it does this and this is how we relate to it. Isn't this light simply the sun? And we are having an illusion that the sun has produced something which is non-light, which is known as light, but it's totally intangible. So even that thing we call darkness, that it is just the absence of light, because when you turn and obstruct this, we have darkness. So what is it? Where is it? Isn't it an illusion? And when therefore we remove this thing that prevents us from having darkness, then we have light. Is it about this thing or light that exists or darkness that really exists, something tangible? And these illusions, I'm thinking along those lines. As I finish, Prof. Mongi raised this, but I would wish to belabor this point. Isn't your viewpoint overly Luo-centric? Isn't the world bigger than this Luo-lawyer dichotomy? If, for instance, you stepped out of the Luo from which you espouse your ideas, wouldn't your ideas collapse? If you stepped out of the Luo construct within which you base much of your rationalizing of things, would your ideas still stand? Or let me say, I just remove Luo and Luya. Would your ideas outlive the existence, the death of the Luo-Luya thing? If you went into, for instance, Meru Ebu, would your ideas find grounding? And as I finish on circumcision, I am a cultural constructivist. I come from the background that culture is constructed. And that when we talk of, for instance, circumcision, it is rational to think that circumcision came at a certain point, in fact, a very short point in time and probably in space, and that it would go. What am I talking about? That it may not be very easy in the long term and to consistently ground an argument about circumcision being informed by questions of availability of water or otherwise. Because, for instance, where me and this brother of mine comes from, in the 90s, HIV caused a lot of havoc. And because of ABCD, people rushed to circumcision. It has now been adopted. Okay, not as a ritual as such, but the average Luo young man is getting circumcised, okay? And so that construction, that kind of change, how do you place that in the context of the long-term view that this was about availability of water and so on? That water is still there. Thank you so much.
Very much, Dr. Uma. Very, very good questions. Yes. So we have about 13 minutes to go, which means if anybody has any other additional comments that they'd like to make, we have limited time. So we'll have Gwada now come and give and respond to those questions and that feedback. And I'll also put some of the questions that he hadn't really gone as much
is light is consistent, but it is defined by the elliptical movement of the earth, such that it is distinguished by the angles and the intensities of that light. So it is not just consistent that it may shine consistently this way, but the elliptical movement of the earth then defines that at some moment, the light will be shining on this end very brightly, and tomorrow it will be shining on the other. So that qualifies the light aspect. So we may not look at light simply as light, but there are angles and intensities of light that determine different practices or characteristics or that customize them. And you find that around the lake basin, you mentioned a very interesting aspect of HIV/AIDS. The simple reason why HIV/AIDS is specifically concentrated around the lake basin is because of light and water. Where there is light, libidos are extremely high. Just like I mentioned the activities of the morning. Polygamy, when you look at polygamy across Africa, you will find that it is located around water basins. So there's the issue to do with water and light, quite critical to understanding the spread of HIV/AIDS. You will find that as a major contributor, why it is concentrated around. And water makes the body perform at an optimum. And with heat, like I told you in the morning, the first reaction is your body reacts in the morning as a man. You think it is because of you, but it is because of the light. That is number one. Number two, you asked which Luhya. Every community has a life center. The first Luhya community that meets the Luo going westwards is the Wanyore, which agglutinates from the Luo word Wanyore, those who separated and established their own home. That's why when you find the groups you're talking about that live within both, it's because of this proximity, one being a product of the other. So going on along, most of the Luhya words, when you go and study the Lunyore dictionary, which is probably the biggest vernacular dictionary we have, you'll find that nearly most of the words, when they talk about dala, ridara, it's just the same language with a few additions. When they talk about reso or huresa, it's the same language, but the context of light and the intensity and angles of light mean that they add an extra angle to qualify the same word, but it is the same. That is number two. Number three, would this theory stand? If I went to the Baganda, I would probably explain to them that their word, their identity, Baganda, comes from the Luo word Ganda, or Ganda, a collection. If you took me to Russia, I would tell them the identity comes from Rusia, Ruso, the first engagement with light after 4 days. Sia, two of a kind. This can explain every toponym and anthroponym of the world. And I gave you the example of Mediterranean, Mediterranean. If I give you the example of London, London, pick up the pieces of light. If I give you the meaning of Washington, was, hington, was, or to grab, all of it can be explained from one source. That's what I'm saying. So I'm only saying that the core thing is that at the center of all these things, there is a center which I can identify and use to move from that point onwards. Then the last one, you mentioned the issue of God. God as law. In the Holy Bible, God is consistently related to light. God is enlightenment. That is why when I speak of my sources, I may speak of spiritual sources of knowledge. But when you talk of God as law, I think I'd even answered that question. That law that gets me up from my bed every day and defines that I shall light a fire at 6 a.m. and that I shall light another fire at 12 noon and that I shall light another fire at 6 p.m. and that I shall change my clothes at the end of the day and wear new clothes at the beginning of the day. That is God as law. It has set the path for you to follow the light. So the light is actually law and determines everything that you do. Today, because the light has become extremely hot today, I am not wearing a raincoat or a jacket. That is law. The light has determined that and the intensity of the heat. Tomorrow, it may be very cold and the heat will be much less. I will be feeling cold. I will wear a jacket. So the light is law. What other point did you raise? God as, which Luhya? I have answered that. Light angles and intensities, I have answered that. So it's not being Luocentric, it's just identifying one to enable me to lead to the next step. And like I had mentioned earlier, I am now working on a universal dictionary of quantum language, which explains all languages, Luo, Luhia, Luganda, all in there from one center, the live center of Luo. The dictionary is about 1,500 pages already, but explains everybody else using this from this center. So, and that means that you have to explain the A, the meaning of B, the meaning of BA, the meaning of CA, the meaning of KI, the meaning of DI, so that you get a complete breakdown of the tools that you use to construct language and that have a universal meaning everywhere. For example, when I talk of Lu as a language categorization, I am saying that Lu is universal, it means light. Luminaries, lukewarm, laksa, illuminate. It's all about light, universally, not only in Luo. So this is a universal message from a Luocentric position. Just like the person I said in the West would look at it differently and give his examples, because from my observation, language comes from an open space in the East and slowly squeezes itself and is compressed as it moves to the West because there is less light. That is why Mediterranean will then be Mediterranean. That is why Japan will be Japano, the secretive one. And Tokyo will be Tokbarabara, behind the road. Or I mean, the whole world. I could do it for any place. But all I have to do is open them. What I'm not doing is I'm getting what was squeezed and opening a map. And there's only 1 or 2 languages that can do that so far. Those 2 that I speak about as the languages of light. And that does not mean that the other languages are languages of darkness. They're probably princes of light. Maybe Iceland is a language of darkness because it could be a completely different context. But as far as the light can heat and warm our parts, we are still able to explain all language from these 2 centric positions. That is my humble submission. I hope I have answered your question.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. If you could say a bit more about which are the languages of darkness, it would be interesting to hear that. And then also another question would be, which had been asked was, does language reflect or create reality? I don't know if you had spoken to that. So just those 2.
Language is born of the need to express a reality. The first, when you look at the vowels, I will just refer here. When you look at the vowels, they all express something. The first instance is ah, oh, ooh. It's wonder. It's wonder. Wonder as a response to light. I've detailed it in this book at a particular chapter. I can't get it. So there is a direct relation between light and language. And that is why you find even where there is life, there must be light. On the contrary, one of the most interesting things is that death simply means the absence of light totally. Death is darkness. When you die, you cannot move. You cannot see because the light has gone out for you. So the light is God and light is life. When you read the Quran, it specifically mentions that the Quran was written at night under moonlight. And it has a symbol based of the sickle. And more, as the professor had mentioned here, what are these sources? If the source, I always give it like the source is spiritual. Why? Each and every religion of the world identifies by carrying a book. The Bible, the Quran, the Christians. The Muslims, the Quran. The Hindus, the Gita. In other words, and that is why you probably find Islamic universities, Catholic universities, Catholic schools, religion or spiritualism and knowledge go hand in hand. And that's why you have prophets. You had asked me a question earlier about the spiritualism. If you read this book, which I wrote a couple of years ago in 2017, I had clearly mentioned a lot of the things that would happen. In my other life outside here, I am a prophet. So I speak and I say, and it goes that way. It has been, and it is written down. I don't talk about it, I write them. So I attribute the little knowledge that I may have to share to God rather than to man. That is the difference. Thank you very much for listening, and God bless you all.
And so, colleagues, it's just a minute to 4:30. We are coming to an end. It has been an extremely stimulating and interesting afternoon. Thank you so much, Gwada, for taking the time to come and share with us. Thank you for the work that you've been doing. I'm in awe of the courage that it takes, the audacity, it's not even self-belief, but I think that's because you're channeling something. It's like downloaded, so it's like it's not even so much work. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you've been doing, and also everybody who asked questions, everybody who was here. Thank you, Professor Mbongi, for also hosting, just having this space, and again also exhibiting that level of courage of just being willing to engage with all ideas, to be able to bring ideas to the academy, to be able to enable academics to engage with people who had like outside of the tradition, which is what enables knowledge to continue growing more and more. So we've come to an end today. And in fact, as you were ending, I remember that there's somebody who recently gave me his book. He's a former reverend with I think the PCA church. So he was defrocked because I think he said pointing out some things in the church. Oh yeah, he actually said pointing out some of the issues that they were having. So there was a lot of drama, and he's written a book about it. So if maybe next year we might have an opportunity to bring him here, that would be quite interesting. Like he's very fiery, and he says a lot more about what's happening in the church today. So this has been great. Everyone who's come in to participate, our colleagues on Zoom, our colleagues over here. It was very good to see you here. And I guess with that, I think let's just give one final appreciation, a round of applause to our guest speaker, Gwada Ogot. Let's give him a hand. And we hope to see him here again. I hope that the questions have not made you feel discouraged, but actually even inspired you to but it's all very optional, because your tradition might not even be an academic tradition. So it's an optional if you even want to explore more of the traditional knowledge that's out there. And so as we come to an end, I'll just call upon Professor Mbongi. I'll hand the mic to Professor Mbongi to just say the final words and bring this officially to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Kingwa. We used to call you KK. I hope you still carry the name. That is one of our former students, and thank you for coming back home and welcome home. Friends, this is really quite complex. The essence of life, according to Gwada, seems to be light and water. I'm still trying to reconcile myself with that. And as he talked, I thought if I had a chance, I could move closer to Kisumu. But at least I take consolation for the fact that my surname begins with O. So I'm closer there, and probably I'm safe. And as he talked, I thought of those of you who have read Ibn Khaldun in his volumes entitled Mukaddimah. He analyzes the influence of warm climate on human innovation and creativity. And perhaps you might want to read Ibn Khaldun. He has several volumes of Mukaddimah. Maybe you might want to look at them. You know, at some point you sounded very theological, then at some point historical. So that's good. Mine is really to thank you, Gwada, because this started as a very simple conversation over lunch at our restaurant here at RISIC in the university. And he has now translated into this extremely interesting conversation that we have had in this Nairobi afternoon, as we try to create the much needed interface between the academy and the public. You know, we have been misconstrued for ages, particularly us, historians and archaeologists. I said last week, on some point, we are thought of being grave diggers and all that. If you're an archaeologist, and those of us who are historians, we are thought of memorizing the names of people who have died and when they died. And I've even had very senior members of government actually saying they don't see the utility of history in the life of a nation. Which is a fairly unfortunate statement to make. So we want to get those connections beyond the hallowed halls of academia to the streets. So thank you, Gwada, for bringing in this. You're among the team that has come from the public out there to speak to us. We had Mushai here, Mangola. We had Grace, who did something on performative history. I was hearing that term for the first time in my life, despite the fact that I've been in this field of history for a while. Performative history, that you can actually convert art and performance and use it to deliver very clearly historical messages. For those of you who are here, I'm sure you know that. So thank you. I want to thank the participants here, a number of our students, some of our colleagues. Mwalimu Ngesa, thank you for coming. I saw Dr. Gache there, and many of our colleagues who were following online. Particularly, I saw one of our colleagues who was our former student, Giduku Nicholas Karaoke from New York. There was a guy from Indianapolis, where I have my many of my relatives in the US. If they are not in Minnesota, they are in Indianapolis. So thank you very much, Githuku, thank you. And I saw many of your questions on my WhatsApp. I wish we had more time, but I will share them with Gwada here. Friends, we have one more seminar presentation to go that will be on the 14th of December, next week. From the centrality of the Luo, we are going to Kambani. In Ukambani, we are looking at what one of our PhD students, Fidelis Kyoko, is calling the rise of music bands. And the title is The Rise of Music Bands, Regimentation and Commodification of Akamba Benga Music. So we'll be doing a bit of dancing next week, which is unique in a university, but that is what we want to achieve, just be no more like any other people. Thank you. God bless you. See you next Thursday to listen to music. Thank you very much.